My son stood over his mother's fresh grave and checked his watch as if he had a train to catch. An hour later, he threw me out of his luxury car into the dirtiest slum in the city and told me to rot. He thought he was discarding a piece of trash. He didn't know he was dropping a king back into his kingdom. My name is Isaiah Freeman. I am 68 years old, and today I am going to tell you how the boy I raised became the monster who tried to bury me alive. If you have ever been underestimated by your own blood, press like and subscribe because this story is for you. The rain at the cemetery felt like ice needles against my neck. It was a gray, miserable Tuesday, the kind of day that seeps into your bones and makes your arthritis scream. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollowness in my chest. Esther was gone. My wife of 40 years, the only woman who ever truly knew me, was being lowered 6 feet into the wet earth. I stepped forward, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the mahogany wood of her casket one last time. I just wanted a second, just 1 second, to say goodbye to the woman who had saved my life more times than I could count. I never got that second. A hand gripped my shoulder, not in comfort, but with the firm, aggressive force of a bouncer throwing a drunk out of a club. It was Jordan, my son. He was 32 years old, wearing a black Italian suit that cost more than my first car. He didn't look at me. He looked at the mud gathering around the hem of his trousers. "Dad, stop making a scene," he hissed, his voice low and cold. "We have to go. The reception starts in 45 minutes and Courtney is already freezing in the car." I looked at him shocked. We hadn't even thrown the dirt yet. The pastor hadn't even finished the final prayer. "Jordan, this is your mother," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Let me pay my respects." He didn't let go of my shoulder. Instead, he dug his fingers in harder, pushing me back away from the grave. He nudged me physically, moving me toward the paved path as if he were herding cattle. "She is gone, Dad," he said, without a shred of emotion in his eyes. "Standing here getting soaked isn't going to bring her back. And frankly, these shoes are suede. I am not ruining them, because you want to be dramatic." Dramatic. My wife was dead and he was worried about his suede shoes. I looked around for support, but there was no one. The few friends who had come were already walking back to their cars, heads down against the rain. I was alone. I let him guide me away, stumbling slightly on the wet grass. He didn't offer an arm to steady me. He walked a step ahead, checking his phone, probably looking at stock prices or cryptocurrency, while his mother was being buried. We reached the black Mercedes SUV idling at the curb. The windows were tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. Jordan opened the back door for me, but not out of courtesy. It was the gesture of a jailer opening a cell. I climbed in. The interior smelled of expensive leather and new car smell, but underneath that was something cloying and artificial. Courtney, my daughter-in-law, was sitting in the passenger seat scrolling through Instagram. She didn't turn around. She didn't offer a condolence. She just pressed a button on the door and the locks engaged with a heavy thud. "Can we go now?" she asked Jordan, her voice sharp. "This neighborhood gives me the creeps. And did he have to bring that old coat? It smells like mothballs and wet dog." I looked down at my trench coat. It was old, yes. Esther had bought it for me 10 years ago. It was the only thing holding me together. Jordan got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The powerful purr of the vehicle drowned out the sound of the rain. He didn't drive toward our home in the quiet suburbs. He turned the car toward the highway heading south. "Where are we going?" I asked, my throat dry. "The house is the other way." Jordan looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were the same shape as mine, but they held none of the warmth. They were shark eyes, flat and dead. "We aren't going to the house, Dad," he said calmly as he merged into traffic. "What do you mean?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "All my things are there. Esther's things." Courtney let out a short, cruel laugh. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a small bottle of perfume, spraying it into the air between us as if to fumigate my presence. "There are no things, Isaiah," she said, using my first name for the first time. "We had the estate cleaners come in this morning while you were at the funeral home. Everything has been cleared out." Cleared out. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. My photos, my clothes, Esther's sewing machine, the collection of jazz records we had built since 1980. "You threw away my life," I shouted, leaning forward. "You had no right. That is my house." Jordan didn't even blink. "Actually, it is not. According to Mom's will, the deed transferred to me upon her death. The paperwork was finalized last week. The house is mine, and Courtney wants to do a full renovation. We are gutting it down to the studs starting tomorrow." I sat back, stunned. Esther would never have signed that. She knew Jordan. She knew his greed. She knew his obsession with status. They must have coerced her or forged it when she was too weak to fight back in those final days at the hospital. I realized then that I didn't have my wallet. I didn't have my house keys. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the grief in my heart. I was trapped in a moving cage with two predators. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You always talk about the old days," Dad Jordan said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "You always talk about how tough you were back in the day, how you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, I am giving you a chance to relive your glory days." He took the exit for the industrial district. The scenery changed rapidly. The manicured lawns and glass office buildings disappeared, replaced by boarded-up storefronts, broken streetlights, and piles of uncollected trash. We were heading into the Bottoms. The Bottoms was a place where hope went to die. It was a graveyard of rusted factories and drug dens, a place even the police avoided after dark. I knew it well. I had grown up near here. I had survived here, but that was 40 years ago. Now it was a war zone. Jordan navigated the potholed streets with a look of disgust on his face. Courtney held a handkerchief over her nose and mouth as if the air outside could infect her through the glass. "Jordan, please," I begged, putting my hand on his shoulder. "Rest. Don't do this. I am your father. I have nowhere to go." He shrugged my hand off as if it were a spider. "You should have thought about that before you became a burden," he said. "You are almost 70. Dad, you have no savings, you have no assets, you are dead weight. Courtney and I are moving up in the world. We are going to be joining the country club. We are looking at a penthouse downtown. We can't have you dragging us down with your old stories and your sad eyes." He slammed on the brakes in front of a massive derelict warehouse at the end of a dead-end street. The building was a rotting carcass of brick and corrugated metal. The windows were shattered or boarded up. Graffiti covered every inch of the walls. A group of men huddled around a burning trash can on the corner watched the luxury car with hungry, predatory eyes. "Get out," Jordan ordered, unlocking the doors. I looked at him, unable to comprehend the level of cruelty. "You are leaving me here, in the rain, in this place. I will die out here, Jordan." "Maybe," Jordan said, turning to look at me properly for the first time. "Or maybe you will find some of that toughness you are always bragging about. Either way, it is not my problem anymore." Courtney turned around, her face twisted in a sneer. "Get out, Isaiah. You are muddying up the upholstery." Jordan got out of the car, walked around to my door, and yanked it open. He grabbed my arm and pulled me out with surprising strength. I stumbled, falling onto the cracked, wet pavement. The cold water soaked through my trousers instantly. He reached into the trunk and pulled out a single duffel bag. It was old, battered, and looked like it had been pulled from the garbage. He threw it at me. It landed with a splash in a puddle next to my head. "There are some clothes in there," Jordan said, standing over me, rain dripping from his nose. "Maybe a sandwich if you are lucky." "Why?" I asked, looking up at him from the ground. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," he answered simply. "Because you are nothing now. You are just a broke old man with nothing to offer. You belong here in the trash." He got back into the car without a backward glance. Courtney didn't even look at me. She just checked her makeup in the visor mirror. The engine roared and the Mercedes peeled away, splashing muddy water into my face. I watched the taillights disappear into the gloom, leaving me alone in the most dangerous street in the city. I sat there in the mud for a long moment, the rain mixed with the tears on my face. My son had taken everything, my home, my wife's memory, my dignity. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had sentenced me to death. I slowly pushed myself up my knees, cracking. I picked up the soggy duffel bag. The men on the corner were watching me, stepping away from their fire, moving toward me like wolves spotting a wounded deer. They saw an old man in a suit, a victim. They didn't know who I was. Jordan didn't know who I was. He thought this warehouse was just a rotting building in a slum. He didn't know that 40 years ago, before I was a quiet husband and father, I was the one who ran these streets. And he certainly didn't know that this warehouse wasn't abandoned. It was a vault, and I was the only one with the combination. I wiped the mud from my face and stood up straight. The sadness began to fade, replaced by a cold, hard rage. Jordan wanted me to be in the Bottoms. Fine. I would show him exactly what comes out of the Bottoms. The taillights of the Mercedes faded into the rainy gloom, leaving me standing in the mud with nothing but a soaked duffel bag and the suit on my back. The street was quiet for a moment, but silence in the bottoms is never empty. It is heavy. It is watching. I could feel eyes on me before I saw them. 3 shadows detached themselves from the corner where the trash can fire burned. They moved with that loose, predatory gait of young men who think they own the pavement because they have never met the ones who paved it. They saw an old man shivering in the rain. They saw a suit that looked expensive. They saw easy prey. I didn't run. I didn't tremble. I planted my feet in the mud and straightened my spine. My arthritis burned, but I locked my knees. I adjusted the collar of my trench coat and waited. They circled me, cutting off my path to the sidewalk. The leader was tall, with a scar running through his eyebrow and a pistol tucked visibly into his waistband. He smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Old man, you look lost," the leader said, his voice mocking. "This is a toll road. You got to pay the toll to stand here." His friends laughed. They stepped closer, reaching for my bag. I looked the leader dead in the eye. I didn't look at the gun. I looked at his face. I studied the shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes. I knew those eyes. I had seen them 40 years ago on a man who used to run numbers on this very block. "I am not lost," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the sound of the rain. "And I am not paying a toll on a street I helped build." The leader stopped. He frowned, confused by the lack of fear. He pulled the gun halfway out. "You think you are tough, old man," he sneered. "I will leave you bleeding in this gutter." I took a step forward, invading his personal space. I smelled the cheap weed and the fear masking itself as aggression. "You have your father's eyes, Dante," I said calmly. The boy froze. His hand hovered over the weapon. Big Marcus was a man of respect. I continued, holding his gaze. He knew better than to rob the elders who kept this neighborhood standing. He knew that without men like me, there would be no street for you to stand on. I held him when he cried after your uncle got locked up. I put money in his pocket when you were born so he could buy you diapers. The other 2 boys looked at their leader, uncertain. The leader, Dante, stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The rain dripped from the brim of his cap. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I am Isaiah Freeman," I said. "And if your father knew you were trying to shake me down, he would come back from the grave to beat you himself." Dante swallowed hard. He looked at my face, searching for the truth, and he found it. He saw the history etched in my wrinkles. He saw the authority that doesn't come from a gun but from survival. He slowly pushed the gun back into his waistband. He signaled to his friends. "Back off," he muttered. They stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea. I didn't say thank you. I didn't smile. I just nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement between men. "Watch the street, Dante," I said as I walked past them. "It is getting dangerous out here." I walked to the chain-link fence surrounding the warehouse without looking back. I could feel their eyes on my back, but this time it wasn't predatory. It was respectful. I had re-established my place in the food chain. I wasn't prey. I was the old lion returning to his territory. I reached the gate. It was wrapped in heavy, rusted chains that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. To the outside world, this place was a tomb, a relic of industry that had died when the factories closed. Jordan thought he had dumped me in a garbage heap. He saw rust and decay. He didn't know that rust is the best camouflage. I knelt down in the mud, pretending to tie my shoe. My fingers worked quickly, prying open a false heel on my left dress shoe. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a small silver key. It was the only key I had kept on me, the only key Jordan hadn't thought to take because he didn't know it existed. I stood up and slipped the key into the heavy padlock hidden beneath the layers of rust. It turned with a smooth, silent click. I unwound the chains, my heart beating a little faster. This was it. The moment of truth. I pushed the small side door open. It groaned, a sound of metal against metal that echoed in the empty street. I stepped inside and closed it behind me, locking it instantly. The darkness was absolute. The air was cold and stale, but it was dry. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of oil and concrete. It smelled like safety. I reached out to the wall, my fingers finding the hidden panel by memory. I flipped the breaker switch. For a second, nothing happened. Then deep beneath the concrete floor, a low hum began. It was a vibration more than a sound. The backup generator, fueled by a natural gas line I had illegally tapped into 30 years ago, sputtered to life. A row of industrial lights flickered overhead, buzzing like angry hornets before settling into a steady yellow glow. The warehouse was revealed. It wasn't a ruin. It was a fortress. The windows were boarded up from the outside, but on the inside they were reinforced with steel plates. The air filtration system kicked on humming softly, pulling the dampness out of the room. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with non-perishable food, water barrels, and tools. I walked to the center of the room. My footsteps echoed on the polished concrete. I looked at the walls and I saw Esther. I remembered the nights we spent here painting and sealing the concrete, working side by side while Jordan was asleep at his grandmother's house. Esther hadn't just been a housewife. She had been my partner in everything. She knew the streets as well as I did. She knew that one day the world might turn against us. Isaiah, she had told me, holding a can of paint, her face smeared with gray dust. We need a place that is ours, a place no bank can take, a place no one knows about. She had been the one to organize the supplies. She had been the one to insist on the generator. This wasn't just a warehouse. It was her legacy. It was her protection wrapping around me even after she was gone. I touched a stack of blankets she had vacuum sealed years ago. I could almost feel her warmth. Jordan thought he had broken me by taking her house. He didn't understand that a house is just wood and drywall. This place, this fortress, was where our true spirit lived, and he had just locked me inside it. I walked to the far corner of the warehouse where an old industrial press sat gathering dust. It looked like a piece of junk, heavy and immovable. I reached under the control panel and pressed a sequence of buttons. A hydraulic hiss filled the air. The heavy metal plate of the press slid aside, revealing a cavity in the floor. Inside sat a large fireproof safe. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I spun the dial. Right to the year we met, left to the year we married, right to the year Jordan was born. The handle clicked. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside it smelled of old paper and wealth. I reached in and pulled out a metal box. I set it on the workbench and opened the lid. The first thing I saw was the cash. Bundles of $20 and $50 bills wrapped in rubber bands. $50,000 in emergency funds. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start a war. It was enough to buy information to hire lawyers to feed myself while I planned my next move. But the cash was the least valuable thing in the box. I pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in leather. I unfolded them on the table, my eyes scanning the legal text. Land deeds. 40 of them. 40 original land deeds for the lots surrounding this warehouse. The abandoned factory next door. The empty lot across the street. The row of condemned houses on the block behind us. I had bought them all in the 80s and 90s when the city had given up on this neighborhood. I had bought them for pennies, paying cash to desperate owners who just wanted to leave. Everyone called me crazy. Everyone said I was throwing money into a black hole. Even Jordan, when he was a teenager, had laughed at me for owning dirt in the ghetto, but I knew something they didn't. I knew cities are living things. They expand, they contract, and then they expand again. I had read the city planning reports last week. The new light rail line was approved. The station was going to be built 2 blocks from here. Developers were already sniffing around looking for land to build luxury condos and shopping centers. This wasn't the bottoms anymore. This was the next gold rush. These 40 deeds weren't just paper. They were worth millions, $15 million at a conservative estimate. And Jordan didn't know about a single one of them. The deed to the family house he had stolen was worth maybe $400,000. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. I reached back into the safe and pulled out the final item, a thick blue folder, the life insurance policy. I had taken it out 20 years ago, a private policy separate from anything connected to my job or the bank. I had paid the premiums in cash every month, walking into the insurance office personally, $5 million. And the beneficiary wasn't Esther anymore. We had changed it 5 years ago when her health started to decline. We knew Jordan was becoming greedy. We knew Courtney was whispering poison in his ear. We wanted to protect the family legacy. The beneficiary name on the document was Isaiah Freeman. I stared at the paper. I was worth $20 million sitting in a rusted warehouse in the rain. The despair that had crushed me in the car evaporated. The grief for my wife was still there, a sharp ache in my heart, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was fuel. My son had kicked a poor old man out of his car. He had sentenced a helpless father to die in the cold. He had no idea that he had just unleashed a tycoon. I ran my hand over the deeds, feeling the texture of the paper. I looked around my fortress. The lights hummed. The air was clean. I had food. I had shelter. And I had the leverage to bring his entire world crashing down. I am not dead, Jordan. I whispered to the empty room, my voice echoing off the steel beams. "I am just getting started." I closed the box and locked the safe. I stood up and walked to the small bathroom in the corner of the warehouse. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. My eyes were red from crying. My suit was muddy. My hair was wet and matted. I washed my face with cold water from the tap. I scrubbed the mud from my skin. I combed my gray hair back. The man staring back at me wasn't a victim. He wasn't a burden. He was the man who had survived the riots of '68. He was the man who had worked double shifts on the docks to put his ungrateful son through private school. He was the man who had bought a kingdom for pennies while everyone else slept. I turned away from the mirror. I grabbed a can of soup from the shelf and opened it. I sat on a crate and ate, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Tomorrow I would go back out there. Tomorrow I would let the world know that Isaiah Freeman was still here. But tonight I would sleep in the house my wife and I built. I looked at the picture of Esther taped to the wall above the workbench. She was smiling, young and beautiful, her hands covered in paint. "Don't worry, Essie," I said, taking a bite of cold soup. "I am going to teach him the lesson we should have taught him years ago." I finished my meal and prepared my bed on a cot in the corner. I checked the locks on the door one last time. I was safe. I was armed with the truth and the resources to weaponize it. The storm outside was raging, but the storm inside me was just beginning to form. Jordan wanted the inheritance. He wanted the legacy. He was going to get it, every single cent, but he was going to pay a price he couldn't afford. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft glow of the security monitors. I laid down, pulling the wool blanket up to my chin. For the first time since Esther died, I closed my eyes and didn't see darkness. I saw the future, and it was going to be biblical. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the bottoms, it only illuminated the decay. I woke up on my cot with a stiffness in my joints that was real enough, but my mind was sharper than a razor. The first order of business was intelligence. I knew how the streets worked. Information was a currency more valuable than gold, and right now I was trading on a deficit. I needed to know why my son was so desperate. A man does not throw his father into a slum just because he is cruel. He does it because he is panicked. I dressed in the clothes Jordan had thrown at me, a pair of stained work pants and a flannel shirt that smelled of mildew. It was the perfect costume. I unlocked the heavy steel door of the warehouse and stepped out into the daylight. The street was already alive with the hustle of survival. Junkies were looking for their first fix, and scrappers were pushing shopping carts filled with copper wire. I walked 3 blocks to a pawn shop with barred windows and a sign that had been broken since 1995. Inside, the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. Behind the glass sat intricate electronic equipment and family heirlooms sold for pennies on the dollar. Sitting on a stool behind the counter was a man named Silas. We had done business 40 years ago when I controlled the unions on the docks. He was older now, his eyes milky with cataracts, but his ears heard everything. "Isaiah Freeman." He croaked, his voice like grinding gears. "I heard you were dead, or at least buried." "Not yet, Silas," I said, leaning against the counter. "I am just underground." I slid $200 in crisp $20 bills under the glass partition. Silas didn't look at the money, but his hand covered it instantly, making it disappear. "I need to know about Jordan Freeman," I said. "I need to know who he owes and how much." Silas laughed, a dry hacking sound. "Your boy. He is playing a game he does not understand. The word on the street is that he is leveraged to the hilt. He put everything into cryptocurrency schemes and high-risk real estate flips. He borrowed from the banks first, then he borrowed from private investors, and when they cut him off, he went to the Russians. My blood ran cold. The banks would take your house, but the Russians would take your fingers. He is drowning, Isaiah." Silas continued, leaning forward. "He has 30 days to come up with $2 million, or they are going to start liquidating him. Literally, that is why he is selling your old house. That is why he is liquidating your wife's jewelry. He is stripping the copper out of the walls of his life just to pay the interest." I walked out of the pawn shop with a heavy heart but a clear head. Jordan wasn't just a greedy social climber. He was a cornered rat, and a cornered rat will bite anything in its path, including his own father. He needed that inheritance not to get rich but to stay alive. That made him dangerous. It meant he would be back. I returned to the warehouse and began my preparations. I knew Jordan. He would not wait long. He needed my signature to clear the title on the house and the assets. He needed me to officially disappear from the legal record. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. I saw it on the grainy black and white monitor of my security system. It wasn't the Mercedes this time. It was a rental. Jordan stepped out looking nervous, adjusting his tie. He was followed by a man I didn't recognize, a slick character in a cheap shiny suit with gelled hair and pointed shoes. A real estate broker or a lawyer of the lowest caliber. I moved quickly. I went to the main breaker panel and killed the ventilation system. The air in the warehouse immediately began to grow stale and heavy. I kicked dust over the clean floor. I scattered some old rags over the workbench to hide the expensive tools. Then I hunched my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I practiced a tremor in my right hand. I was no longer the king of the warehouse. I was a confused, dying old man. The pounding on the metal door was aggressive. I waited, let them pound again before I shuffled over. I unlocked the deadbolt with agonizing slowness, fumbling with the latch until I heard Jordan curse on the other side. I pushed the door open just enough to peer out, my eyes squinting against the light. "Jordan," I wheezed, adding a wet rattle to my voice. "Is that you, son?" Jordan pushed the door open, forcing me to stumble back. The smell of his cologne clashed violently with the musty air of the warehouse. He stepped inside, looking around with undisguised revulsion. "Jesus, Dad, it smells like a grave in here," he said, covering his nose. The man in the shiny suit followed him in, stepping gingerly over a puddle of oil I had deliberately left near the entrance. He looked at me like I was a cockroach he was afraid to step on. "This is the father?" the man asked Jordan, his voice dripping with skepticism. "He looks half dead already. Are you sure he is competent to sign?" "He is fine," Jordan snapped, though he didn't look at me. "He is just old." "Dad, this is Mr. Sterling. He is helping me with some paperwork. We need to clear up some things regarding Mom's estate so we can get you some better care." Better care. That was the bait. I coughed a long, hacking cough that shook my whole body. I leaned against a rusted support beam for support. "I am hungry, Jordan," I mumbled. "It is cold here, mister." Sterling kicked a pile of dirty tarps near his feet. Underneath those tarps was a crate of military-grade rations that could feed a family for a year, but to him it was just garbage. "Let us get this over with," Jordan said, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. "This place is disgusting. I don't want to catch whatever he has." He led me to a wobbly table in the center of the room. He didn't offer me a chair. He spread the documents out on the dusty surface. "I need you to sign here," Dad Jordan said, pointing to a line at the bottom of a dense legal document. "And here. And initial here." I leaned over, peering at the paper through my unkempt eyebrows. I couldn't read the fine print without my glasses, but I knew exactly what it was. It was a waiver. A document stating that I voluntarily relinquished all claims to the marital home, all joint bank accounts, and any assets held in Esther's name. It also stated that I was of sound mind and body and was doing this of my own free will. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Is this for the house?" "It is just standard procedure," Dad Jordan said, his impatience rising like steam. "It allows me to manage the bills. You know you can't handle the finances anymore. Remember how you forgot to pay the water bill last year? That was a lie. I had never missed a bill in my life." But I nodded slowly, accepting his narrative. "I just want to go home," I whispered. "Sign the papers and we will see about getting you into a nice facility." Jordan lied. "A place with heat and food." He handed me a sleek, expensive fountain pen. It felt heavy in my hand. This was the moment. This was the trap. If I signed this, I lost the house legally. But if I didn't sign it, he would find another way, probably a violent one. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to think I was beaten so he would turn his back on me. I took the pen in my right hand. My hand shook violently. I brought the tip down to the paper, and then I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the table and rolled onto the dirty floor. Jordan groaned, a sound of pure frustration. "Pick it up, Dad. God, you are useless." I bent down slowly, my knees cracking loudly. I fumbled for the pen in the dust. When I stood up, I held the pen in my left hand. "I am sorry, son," I mumbled. "My hand. It hurts." "Just sign it," Jordan barked. I pressed the pen to the paper. "I am right-handed. I have been right-handed for 68 years. But in that moment, I became left-handed. I scratched out a signature that was barely legible. It looked nothing like the bold, clear signature I had used on legal documents for decades. It was the scrawl of a sick, confused man. It was the signature of a man under duress. Any forensic handwriting analyst would look at this later and testify that it was either a forgery or signed by a person who was physically incapacitated. It was my exit strategy hidden in plain sight. I signed all 3 pages. With every stroke of the pen, I saw Jordan's shoulders relax. He snatched the papers away as soon as the ink was dry, blowing on them to set it. Finally, he muttered, handing the papers to Mr. Sterling, who tucked them into a leather briefcase. "Is that it?" I asked, looking up at him with wide, watery eyes. "Can I come with you now?" Jordan laughed. It was a cold sound that echoed off the steel walls of the warehouse. He looked at me with pity and disgust. "You really don't get it, do you, Dad?" he said. "You aren't going anywhere. You live here now. This is where you belong." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills. He crumpled them into a ball and threw them at me. The money hit my chest and fell to the floor, landing in the dust next to my shoes. "That should keep you in soup for a month," Jordan said. "Don't call me. Don't come to the house. If you show your face in my neighborhood again, I will have you arrested for trespassing." He turned on his heel and walked out. Mr. Sterling followed him, casting one last look of disdain at the warehouse. The heavy metal door slammed shut, leaving me in the darkness once again. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of the rental car engine fading into the distance. I looked down at the $500 on the floor. It was the ultimate insult. He had stolen my life, my home, and my memories, and he had tipped me like a waiter. I slowly bent down and picked up the bills. I smoothed them out and placed them in my pocket. I wasn't going to spend them on soup. I was going to spend them on gasoline. I walked back to the breaker panel and flipped the switch. The ventilation system hummed back to life, clearing the stale air. I stood up straight, my posture shifting from the hunched defeat of the old man back to the upright bearing of Isaiah Freeman. I went to the sink and washed the dust from my face. I looked in the mirror. The sadness was gone completely now. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. Jordan thought he had just bought his freedom for $500. He thought he had severed the tie. He didn't know he had just signed his own death warrant. He had underestimated the man who raised him. He had underestimated the streets that made me. And worst of all, he had forgotten that I knew exactly where the bodies were buried because I was the one who dug the graves. I walked over to the safe and opened it again. I took out the land deeds and the insurance policy. I placed them next to the crumpled bills Jordan had thrown at me. "You want a war, son?" I said to the empty room. "You got one." I reached for the burner phone I had bought at the pawn shop earlier. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 20 years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah. It is Isaiah," I said. "I need a meeting." There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice filled with respect and a hint of fear spoke back. "Mr. Freeman, we thought you were retired." I said, my eyes fixed on the steel door. "But something has come up. I need a suit, I need a car, and I need a reservation at the Le Monde restaurant for tonight. You got it, boss." I hung up the phone. Tonight, I wasn't going to be the victim. Tonight, I was going to find out exactly who owned my son's debt, and then I was going to become his nightmare. Invisibility is a superpower if you know how to use it. For 40 years, I walked through this city as a king in the shadows, but tonight I had to become something else. I had to become the furniture. I had to become the dirt beneath their feet. Le Monde was the kind of restaurant where they served water in crystal glasses, and the menu didn't list prices because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Jordan had been begging me to eat here for years, trying to show off his new status. Tonight he was here, but he wasn't celebrating. I entered through the service door wearing a gray jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. I had called in a favor from an old friend who ran the cleaning crew. He asked no questions. He just handed me a mop and a bucket and pointed me toward the dining room. I walked onto the plush carpet, keeping my head down. I was an old black man with a cleaning rag. To the people in this room, I did not exist. I was part of the background noise. I moved slowly toward the corner booth where my son sat. Jordan looked terrible. His skin was gray and he was sweating despite the air conditioning. Courtney sat next to him, her face tight with a mixture of fear and anger. Across from them sat 2 men I didn't recognize. They were white, thick-necked, and wore suits that were cut to hide shoulder holsters. They didn't touch their food. They just stared at Jordan. I knelt down 3 feet away from their table, pretending to scrub a non-existent stain on the baseboard. My knees screamed in protest against the hard floor. A waiter walked by and kicked my foot without apologizing. I didn't flinch. I kept my head bowed, my eyes fixed on the floor, but my ears were tuned to a frequency only desperation broadcasts. One of the men at the table leaned forward. He had a heavy Russian accent, thick and syrupy, like oil. "You are running out of time, Mr. Freeman," the Russian said. "We have been very patient, but patience is expensive." I scrubbed harder, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a bank meeting. This wasn't a foreclosure. This was the underworld. "We just need a little more time," Jordan stammered, his voice cracking. "My mother just died. Her estate is in probate. It is complicated." The Russian laughed a low, humorless sound. "Probate is a legal term," the man said. "We do not operate in the legal system. You borrowed $2 million to leverage a position in a coin that does not exist. You told us you had the collateral. You told us you owned the properties." "We do own them," Courtney interjected, her voice sharp. "My husband is the sole heir. His father is old and incompetent. He signed the rights over just days ago. We are liquidating the assets now." I froze. They were selling my life before the ink was even dry on the fake papers. The Russian picked up a steak knife. He turned it over in his hand, the silver catching the light. "Paperwork takes too long," he said softly. "My boss is not a man who likes to wait for paperwork. You have 30 days. Not 31. 30. If we do not have $2 million plus the VIG by the 1st of the month, we will not take your house. We will take your fingers, one by one, starting with the thumbs." Jordan made a whimpering sound, a noise of pure terror. "Please," Jordan begged. "I will get it, I promise. My father has a life insurance policy too. We just need to access it." The Russian stood up. He dropped the knife onto the table. It clattered loudly against the china. 30 days, the Russian said, "or we start cutting." The two men walked away, their heavy footsteps swallowed by the carpet. I stayed on my knees, scrubbing the same spot, afraid to breathe. Jordan put his head in his hands. "We are dead," he whispered. "We are actually dead. There is no way we can sell the house and the contents in 30 days. The market is too slow, and if Dad fights the signature, if he causes a scene, we are finished." Courtney grabbed his arm. Her nails dug into his suit jacket. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure venom. "He won't fight," she hissed. "He is a pathetic old man living in a warehouse. But we can't take the risk, Jordan. We can't wait for him to die of natural causes. We don't have years. We have weeks." "What are you saying?" Jordan asked, looking at her with wide, wet eyes. "I am saying we need that insurance money now," Courtney said. "And we need to sell that land without him popping up to claim it. If he is incompetent, it takes months of court hearings. If he is dead, it takes 3 days to get a death certificate." My hand stopped moving. The rag dripped dirty water onto the floor. I held my breath, waiting for my son to defend me, waiting for him to say that he would never hurt his father. Jordan wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at his wife. He didn't look horrified. He looked relieved. "How do we do it?" he whispered. "Make it look like a robbery," Courtney said, her voice cold and practical. "The Bottoms is a dangerous place. Old men get killed there every day for the shoes on their feet. Who is going to question it if a junkie breaks into that warehouse and bashes his head in?" Jordan nodded slowly. "We can hire someone," he said. "I know a guy from the old neighborhood." "Do it," Courtney said, picking up her wine glass. "Call him tonight. I don't care what you have to do, Jordan. Kill the old man if you have to. I am not losing my fingers because you made a bad investment." They clinked their glasses, a toast to my murder. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the death of hope. The death of the last tiny sliver of love I had held for my son. He wasn't just desperate. He was willing to sacrifice me on the altar of his own greed. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking. I picked up my bucket. They didn't even look at me. I was just the janitor. I was just the help. I walked away, my back straight, carrying the weight of their betrayal like a stone. I walked into the men's restroom and locked the door behind me. It was a palace of marble and gold fixtures, smelling of lavender and money. I set the bucket down in the center of the room. I walked to the mirror and gripped the edges of the sink, my knuckles turning white. I looked at the man in the reflection. He was wearing a gray jumpsuit. He looked tired. He looked old. He looked like a victim. I turned on the faucet. The water ran hot and clear. I splashed it onto my face, scrubbing away the sweat and the humiliation. I washed away the father who had protected his son from the consequences of his actions for 32 years. I washed away the husband who had promised his wife he would always take care of their boy. That promise was broken. Jordan broke it. I took a paper towel and dried my face. I stared into my own eyes. The sadness was gone. The grief was gone. In their place was something ancient and terrifying. My son had just sat at a table and agreed to have me killed. He had agreed to let a stranger bash my head in so he could keep his thumbs. I unzipped the jumpsuit and stepped out of it, revealing the tailored suit underneath. I kicked the gray rag into the corner. I wasn't the janitor anymore. I wasn't the victim. I adjusted my tie. I smoothed my hair. I took a deep breath, inhaling the expensive air of the restaurant. "You want to play the game, son?" I said to the mirror, my voice steady and low. "You want to bring violence to my doorstep. You forgot who built the doorstep." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I sent a single text message to Aaliyah King, the lawyer I had vetted earlier that day. Buy the debt. All of it. I put the phone away. I unlocked the door and walked out of the restroom. I didn't look back at the jumpsuit on the floor. I walked through the dining room past Jordan and Courtney, who were too busy arguing to notice the man in the suit walking by. I walked out the front door into the night. The city lights were bright, but my path was clear. Jordan thought he had 30 days. He was wrong. He didn't have 30 days. He didn't have a prayer. The father was dead. The judge had just taken the bench, and the sentencing was going to be severe. I returned to the warehouse with the weight of my son's betrayal hanging heavy on my shoulders, but my mind was clear and cold. I knew they were coming back. They were desperate, and desperate people move fast. They had two options left: kill me or lock me away forever. I decided to give them a third option. I would let them think I was already gone. I would let them think my mind had snapped like a dry twig. The next morning, I walked back to the corner where Dante and his crew held court. They straightened up when they saw me, the fear and respect from our first encounter still fresh in their eyes. I didn't want trouble. I wanted hardware. I needed eyes in the back of my head. I handed Dante a list written on the back of a napkin and $300. He didn't ask questions. 2 hours later, he returned with a plastic bag filled with high-definition pinhole cameras and audio bugs, the kind you buy from the back of an electronics truck in the city. I spent the afternoon turning my fortress into a trap. I installed the cameras in the most obvious places they would never look. I hid one inside the rusted casing of an old fuse box. I placed another inside the hollow leg of the workbench. I tucked a microphone behind the peeling wallpaper near the door. Every angle was covered. Every whisper would be recorded. The feed went directly to a secure cloud server accessed only by my burner phone. Then I set the stage. I needed to look like a man who was losing his grip on reality. I didn't just mess up the room, I curated a disaster. I pulled old newspapers out of the trash and scattered them in piles, creating a maze of nonsense. I took a jar of peanut butter and smeared it on the windows as if I were trying to seal out imaginary demons. I stopped shaving. I let the dirt accumulate under my fingernails. I turned off the air filtration system, allowing the smell of mildew and stagnation to reclaim the space. I moved the furniture to create obstacles. I placed a chair facing the wall as if I spent hours staring at the bricks. I created a nest of blankets in the corner surrounded by empty cans and broken glass. It was a masterpiece of decay. It was the physical manifestation of the dementia they wanted to diagnose me with. I sat in the chair facing the wall and waited. I slowed my breathing. I let my jaw go slack. I unfocused my eyes. I wasn't Isaiah Freeman, the king of the bottoms, anymore. I was a husk. I was a problem to be solved. They arrived at dusk. I saw the headlights cut through the grime on the windows. It wasn't the rental car this time. It was a white van, the kind used for medical transport, but without any logos. Jordan and Courtney stepped out, followed by a man I had never seen before. He was tall, thin, and carried a black medical bag. He didn't look like a doctor who cured people. He looked like a doctor who made problems disappear. They pounded on the door. I didn't answer immediately. I let them pound again. I let them shout. I wanted them frustrated. I wanted them impatient. When I finally opened the door, I didn't look at them. I looked past them at something that wasn't there. I swatted at the air as if fighting off invisible flies. "The flies are loud today," I mumbled, stepping back into the shadows. Jordan stepped in and gagged. The smell was overpowering. "Jesus, Dad," he said, covering his mouth. "You live like an animal." Courtney walked in her heels, clicking on the concrete. She looked around with a mixture of disgust and triumph. This was exactly what she wanted to see. This was the proof she needed. "This is Dr. Eris." Courtney said, gesturing to the thin man. "He is here to give you a checkup, Isaiah. We are worried about you. You don't seem well." Dr. Aris stepped forward. His eyes were cold and professional. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer a hand. He just opened his bag and pulled out a stethoscope and a small flashlight. "Sit down, Mr. Freeman," the doctor ordered. I sat on the wobbly chair I had prepared. I started rocking back and forth, humming a tune that had no melody. Jordan stood by the door looking nervous. He was checking his phone, probably waiting for the signal to load me into the van. Dr. Aris shined the light in my eyes, blinding me. "Do you know what year it is, Mr. Freeman?" he asked. "It is the year of the flood," I whispered, my eyes wide. "The water is coming. It is under the floor." The doctor looked at Courtney and nodded slightly. "He is disoriented," Dr. Aris stated flatly. "Classic signs of advanced cognitive decline, paranoia, hallucinations." Courtney walked over to the table where a pitcher of water sat. I had filled it earlier, but while my back was turned, she reached into her purse. I saw her reflection in the darkened window glass. She pulled out a small vial and tipped 3 drops of clear liquid into a plastic cup. She poured water over it, swirling it gently. She approached me with a smile that was all teeth. "Here, Isaiah," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Drink some water. You look dehydrated." I looked at the cup. I knew what was in it. A sedative. A hallucinogen. Something to make sure that when I arrived at the facility I would be screaming at monsters that only I could see. I took the cup with a trembling hand. "Thank you," I said. "You are a good girl." "Not like the other one, the one with the snakes in her hair." Courtney rolled her eyes at Jordan. "See," she mouthed. "He is gone." "Drink it, Dad," Jordan urged. "Just drink it so we can go." I lifted the cup to my lips. The water smelled faintly metallic. I took a large mouthful, but I didn't swallow. I held the liquid in my cheeks, letting a little dribble down my chin to sell the performance. Then I started to cough. It was a violent, retching cough. I bent over, hacking loud and hard. I grabbed a dirty rag from my pocket and pressed it to my mouth. I spit the water into the fabric, burying the evidence in the folds of the gray cloth. I wiped my mouth, smearing the water across my face. I dropped the cup. It bounced on the floor, spilling the rest of the poison. "Spicy," I whispered, looking at the doctor with fear. "The water is spicy." Dr. Aris sighed. He reached into his bag again, this time pulling out a syringe. "Oral administration failed," he muttered. "We will have to sedate him intravenously." Jordan took a step forward. "Let us just get him in the van. We don't need to knock him out here." "No," Courtney snapped. "He is too big. If he fights, we will attract attention." "Do it, doctor." The doctor uncapped the needle. This was it. I had seconds before they forced me under. I had to pivot. I had to change the narrative from insanity to greed. I stood up suddenly, knocking the chair over. I backed away toward the center of the room where the concrete floor was cracked and uneven. "You can't have it," I shouted, my voice changing from confused to defensive. "You can't take the box. It is mine." Jordan stopped. "What box, Dad? What are you talking about?" "The metal box," I rambled, pointing a shaking finger at the floor beneath the industrial press. "The one with the gold. The one from the union days. Big Marcus paid me. He paid me in gold bars so the tax man wouldn't know. It is all down there. Millions." The room went silent. The doctor froze the needle, hovering in midair. Courtney's eyes widened. She looked at the floor, then at me, then at Jordan. "Gold," she whispered. I fell to my knees, scratching at the concrete with my fingernails. "You have to dig deep," I babbled. 6 feet deep. Under the press. That is where I put it. That is why I came back. To guard the gold. You can't have it. It is for the baby." Jordan looked at Courtney. His desperation was palpable. He needed $2 million in 30 days. If there was even a chance that I was telling the truth, he couldn't ignore it. "Dad," Jordan said, stepping closer, his voice trembling with greed. "Is there really gold here? Did you hide money from Mom?" I didn't answer him. I just kept scratching at the floor, muttering about the union and the gold bars and the tax man. I was weaving a story that fit perfectly with what they knew about me. I was a former union boss. It was plausible that I had skimmed money. It was plausible that I had hidden it. Courtney grabbed the doctor's arm, stopping him from advancing. "Wait," she hissed. "What are you doing?" Jordan asked. "We have to go." "Think, Jordan." Courtney snapped, her eyes fixed on the floor. If we commit him now, the state takes guardianship. They will inventory everything. If they find gold here, it goes to the state or to pay for his care. We won't see a dime." She looked at me, her calculation visible. "If he is crazy, he might forget where it is," she said. "But right now, he remembers. We need to find it first." She turned to the doctor. "Not today," she said. The doctor looked annoyed. "Mrs. Freeman, I have a schedule." "I said not today," Courtney barked. "We will call you when we are ready. Get out." The doctor capped the needle and put it back in his bag. He looked at me with a professional indifference and walked out the door. Jordan looked at his wife. "What are we doing, Courtney?" "The Russians want money," Courtney said, walking over to where I was scratching the floor. "And your father just told us the answer is under our feet. We are going to find that gold, Jordan, and once we have it, then we can dispose of him." She looked down at me with a predatory smile. "Don't worry, Isaiah," she said, her voice soft and dangerous. "We will help you protect the box." They left 10 minutes later. They didn't take me to the asylum. They didn't kill me. They left me there to guard the imaginary treasure that would be their undoing. I waited until I heard the van drive away. I stood up and dusted off my knees. I walked to the sink and rinsed my mouth out just in case any of the poison remained. I looked at the spot on the floor where I had been scratching. There was no gold down there. There was only dirt and concrete. But to them, it was the Holy Grail. I checked the camera feed on my phone. The image was crisp. The audio was clear. I had them on tape discussing the sedation. I had the doctor preparing the needle. And most importantly, I had them admitting that they were only keeping me alive to steal my hidden fortune. Greed is a powerful leash. I had just wrapped it around their necks. Now all I had to do was pull. The glass doors of the King & Associates law firm were heavy and spotless, the kind of glass that reflects your own inadequacy right back at you. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, adjusting the collar of my flannel shirt. I had brushed the worst of the warehouse dust off my trousers and slicked my hair back with water, but there was no hiding what I looked like. To the world, I was a vagrant. I was a man who belonged in a shelter or a soup kitchen, not in the lobby of the most prestigious black-owned law firm in the city. I walked in. The air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. The receptionist was a young woman with braided hair and a headset who stopped typing the moment her eyes landed on my boots. They were muddy. I saw her nose wrinkle slightly. She didn't offer a greeting. She just reached for the security button under her desk. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice tight and defensive. "Deliveries are in the back." "I am not a delivery man," I said, my voice raspy from days of breathing stale air. "I am here to see Aaliyah King." The receptionist laughed a short, incredulous sound. "Ms. King is in meetings all day. She does not see walk-ins, especially not without a retainer." "Tell her Isaiah Freeman is here," I said. "Tell her I knew her father Marcus when he was running numbers out of a barber shop." The girl hesitated. The name Marcus King carried weight in this town even 20 years after he died. She picked up the phone, whispering urgently. A moment later, the double doors behind her opened. Aaliyah King stepped out. She was impressive. She wore a tailored crimson suit that screamed power, and her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and currently filled with annoyance. She looked at me, and I saw the recognition flicker, followed immediately by dismissal. She saw an old friend of her father who had fallen on hard times. She saw a charity case. "Mr. Freeman," she said, walking toward me but stopping a safe distance away. "I heard about Esther. I am very sorry, but I am extremely busy today. If you need help with funeral costs or housing services, I can have my assistant print out a list of resources." I didn't move. I didn't beg. I looked her in the eye the same way I had looked at her father when we negotiated territory in 1985. "I don't need a list, Aaliyah," I said. "I need a shark. And your father told me you were the best shark in the water. Isaiah." "Please," she said, checking her watch. "I have a deposition in 20 minutes. I cannot help you today." I walked past the receptionist's desk, ignoring her gasp. I walked straight to the glass conference table in the center of the waiting area. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of rubber-banded cash. $10,000. I slapped it onto the glass. The sound was loud, like a gunshot in a library. Aaliyah stopped. Her eyes locked onto the money. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the leather-bound folder containing the deeds. I placed it gently next to the cash. "I am not here for a handout," I said, my voice low and hard. "I am here to hire you. and I am paying cash. Aaliyah looked at the money, then at the folder, then at me. The annoyance vanished, replaced by the calculating look of a professional who realizes they have misjudged the situation. She signaled to the receptionist to hold her calls. "Come into my office, Mr. Freeman," she said. I followed her into a corner office that smelled of mahogany and expensive coffee. I sat in a leather chair that cost more than my first car. Aaliyah sat behind her desk and pulled the leather folder toward her. She opened it with the skepticism of a woman who has seen every con game in the city. "What is this?" she asked, putting on her reading glasses. "It is the future," I said. She flipped through the first deed, then the second, then the third. Her movements slowed. She stopped reading the legal boilerplate and started looking at the addresses and the lot numbers. She pulled up a digital map on her computer screen, her eyes darting back and forth between the paper and the screen. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked up at me, and for the first time she didn't see a bum. She saw a player. "Mr. Freeman, do you know what these are?" she asked. Her voice hushed. "I know exactly what they are," I replied. "They are 40 parcels of industrial-zoned land in the bottoms." Aaliyah leaned back in her chair, taking off her glasses. "The city just approved the light rail extension," she said. "The new stadium district is being zoned right through the middle of this sector. Developers are killing each other to get land rights in that area." "I know," I said. "These deeds," she tapped the paper, "these are original, unencumbered. You own 6 city blocks of the most valuable undeveloped real estate in the state." She did a quick mental calculation. I could see the numbers scrolling behind her eyes. Conservatively, she whispered, "Just the land value alone. This is worth $15 million, maybe 20 if we start a bidding war." I nodded slowly. "And I have a $5 million life insurance policy on top of that." Aaliyah looked at me. She looked at my muddy boots, my flannel shirt, my tired face. She realized that the man sitting in front of her was not a victim of the system. I was the system. I was a sleeping giant that had just woken up. "Why do you look like this?" she asked. "Why are you living in a warehouse if you are worth $20 million? "Because my son thinks I am a piece of trash," I said. "He threw me away, Aaliyah. He stole my house. He stole my wife's jewelry. And now he and his wife are planning to have me committed to an asylum so they can find this money." Her expression hardened. Aaliyah King had a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom, but she had a soft spot for loyalty. She hated betrayal. "He doesn't know about the deeds," she asked. "He thinks I am a broke old man," I said. "He thinks he won." Aaliyah closed the folder and placed her hand on top of it. "I will represent you, Mr. Freeman," she said. "I will sue him for the house. I will sue him for elder abuse. I will strip him of everything he took." "No," I said. She frowned. "No, you don't want to sue." I leaned forward. "Suing him is too easy. If we sue him, he gets a lawyer. He delays. He hides assets. He plays the victim. I don't want a lawsuit, Aaliyah. I want a hostile takeover." I explained the situation with the Russians. I told her about the $2 million debt. I told her about the threats to cut off his fingers. Aaliyah listened, her face pale. "This is dangerous, Isaiah. These aren't bankers. These are mobsters." "Exactly," I said. "And mobsters only care about one thing, getting paid. They don't care who pays them as long as the check clears." I reached into the duffel bag and pulled out the rest of the cash I had brought. Another $40,000. "I want you to set up a shell company," I said. "Call it Freeman Holdings, but bury my name so deep in the paperwork that God himself couldn't find it. Then I want you to contact the Russians." "You want to pay off his debt?" Aaliyah asked, confused. "You want to save him after everything he did?" I laughed, a dry, cold sound that made Aaliyah flinch. "Save him? No. I want to buy the paper." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city streets. "I want to buy his debt from the Russians," I said. "I want to become the holder of his note. I want to be the one he owes $2 million to. Because the bank has rules, Aaliyah. The bank has to give you notice. The bank has to follow the law." I turned back to her. "But if I own the debt, I own him. I can call it in whenever I want. I can foreclose on everything he has. I can take his car, his clothes, his dignity. I want to hold the leash." Aaliyah stared at me. She saw the darkness in my plan. It wasn't justice. It was vengeance. It was biblical. "It will cost you $2 million of your liquid assets," she said. "You will have to borrow against the land value. It is a risk." "It is an investment," I corrected her. "An investment in education. I am going to teach my son a lesson about power." Aaliyah picked up her pen. She pulled a fresh legal pad toward her. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Okay, Mr. Freeman," she said. "Let us buy a soul." She started drafting the articles of incorporation for the shell company. I watched her work. My son thought he was playing chess, but he didn't even know he was on the board. He was worried about the Russians breaking his thumbs. He didn't know that his father was about to break his life. I sat back in the leather chair and closed my eyes. I could feel the momentum shifting. The wind was at my back now. I had the money. I had the lawyer. And soon I would have the ownership of my son's very existence. "Make the call," I said. "Tell the Russians Freeman Holdings is ready to make a deal. Full payment. Cash wire transfer. Today." Aaliyah picked up the phone. The game had changed. The prey had just become the predator, and the hunt was on. I was waiting for my son to return, but the devil arrived first. It was 2 days after the doctor visit, and the air in the warehouse was thick with the waiting. I sat on my cot listening to the hum of the hidden cameras I had installed. I expected Jordan. I expected him to come back with a shovel or a pickaxe to dig for the imaginary gold I had rambled about. But when the heavy metal door groaned and rattled, it wasn't Jordan who stepped through the shadows. It was Courtney. She didn't come alone. 2 men flanked her like guard dogs. They were thick-necked and wore leather jackets that creaked when they moved. They weren't professionals like the Russians at the restaurant. These were street thugs hired muscle paid in cash to break things and ask no questions. Courtney walked into my sanctuary with a look of pure entitlement. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist and boots that cost more than the building we were standing in. She looked around, wrinkling her nose at the staged mess I had created. She didn't see a father-in-law. She didn't see a human being. She saw an obstacle standing between her and a payday. "Where is it, Isaiah?" she demanded, her voice echoing off the steel walls. I stayed seated on the cot, playing my part. I rocked back and forth, mumbling to myself, my eyes darting around the room as if chasing invisible flies. "The birds are singing," I whispered. "They sing about the rain." Courtney stepped closer, her patience snapping like a dry twig. She signaled to the 2 men. "Grab him," she ordered. The men moved fast. They crossed the room in 3 strides. One of them grabbed my left arm, the other grabbed my right. They hauled me up from the cot. Their grip was bruising, but I didn't fight. I went limp, letting my head loll back, letting my mouth hang open. I needed them to believe I was weak. I needed them to believe I was broken so they would get careless. "Make him talk," Courtney hissed, getting into my face. "Ask him where the box is." The man on my right shook me hard. "Where is the gold, old man?" he barked. I giggled, a high-pitched sound that made Courtney flinch. "Under the sea," I babbled. "Under the floor. The captain knows." Courtney screamed in frustration. She looked around the warehouse, her eyes landing on the few meager possessions I had set out. A small table, a few cans of food, and in the corner, a rocking chair. It was Esther's chair. I had rescued it from the house before Jordan threw me out, strapping it to the roof of the car in my mind, even though I knew I had left it behind. No, wait. I had found a similar one in the trash outside a few days ago. It wasn't hers, but it represented her. It was the only comfort in this cold room. "Tear this place apart," Courtney commanded, turning to the shelves. "If he won't tell us, we will find it ourselves. Start breaking things. Maybe the noise will jog his memory." The thugs threw me onto the cot, and one of them kept a heavy hand on my chest, pinning me down. The other joined Courtney in a frenzy of destruction. They weren't just searching, they were punishing. They tipped over the shelves, sending cans of soup rolling across the concrete. They ripped the blankets off the bed. They smashed the few plates I had. Then Courtney saw the picture. It was the photo of Esther I had taped to the wall above the workbench. It was a copy of the one I carried in my wallet. She was young, smiling with paint in her hair. It was the heart of this room. Courtney walked over to it. She looked at the face of the woman who had welcomed her into the family, who had cooked her dinner, who had tried to love her. "Stupid old witch," Courtney muttered. She reached out and ripped the photo from the wall. She crumpled it in her hand, turning my wife's face into a ball of paper. Then she threw it on the floor and kicked it into a puddle of oil. I felt a surge of rage so powerful it almost broke my cover. My muscles tensed, ready to snap the wrist of the man holding me down. I could have done it. I knew the leverage points. I could have broken his arm and been on Courtney in 2 seconds. But I stopped myself. Violence would feel good, but it would end the game. It would reveal that I was sane. It would send me to jail or get me killed before I could finish my work. I forced my body to relax. I forced a whimper from my throat. "Don't hurt the lady," I cried, soft and pathetic. "She is sleeping." Courtney ignored me. She was looking at the industrial press in the corner, the place where I had scratched at the floor during the doctor's visit. "Move that machine," she ordered the thug. The man groaned, straining against the heavy metal. He managed to shove it a few inches to the left. There was nothing there but concrete. "Dig," Courtney screamed. He said it was under the floor. The man pulled out a crowbar from his belt. He smashed it against the concrete, chipping away a few flakes. It was solid. There was no hollow sound. There was no secret compartment. "He is lying, lady," the thug said, breathing hard. "There is nothing here. This old man is just crazy." Courtney turned on me, her face twisted into a mask of fury. She walked over and slapped me. It wasn't a slap to correct behavior. It was a slap to cause pain. Her ring cut my cheek. "You lying, senile fool," she shrieked. "Where is the money? Jordan owes $2 million. If we don't pay, they kill him. And if he dies, I lose everything. I am not going back to being poor Isaiah. I am not going to live in a trailer because you are too selfish to die." She was revealing everything. She didn't care about Jordan's life, she cared about her lifestyle. She didn't care about the family, she cared about the status. "Look over there," the thug holding me said, pointing to a high shelf in the shadows. "What is that?" Courtney looked up. Tucked away in the darkness, covered in dust, was a metal box. It was an old ammunition crate, rusted and heavy. It looked exactly like the kind of box an old man would use to hide his treasure. My heart stopped for a second. I had forgotten I put it there. It wasn't the gold, it wasn't the deeds. Those were safe in the floor safe, hidden by the hydraulic mechanism. This box was something else, something personal. "Get it down," Courtney ordered, her voice trembling with greed. The thug released me and climbed up on the workbench. He grabbed the heavy metal box and brought it down. It landed on the table with a dull thud that sounded like promise. Courtney's hands shook as she reached for the latch. "This is it," she whispered. "This has to be it. Millions in gold bars." That is what he said. I sat up on the cot, wiping the blood from my cheek. I stopped rocking. I stopped mumbling. I just watched. She popped the latch. The rusty hinges squealed. She threw the lid back. She stared into the box. The thug leaned over her shoulder, his eyes wide with anticipation. Inside the box, there was no gold. There was no cash. There were no deeds. There was a simple ceramic urn. It was white, cracked with age, and sealed with wax. On the side, in Esther's handwriting, was a name painted in blue. Buster. It was the ashes of our first dog, a golden retriever we had rescued from the pound the year we got married. Buster had been our child before Jordan was born. He had slept at the foot of our bed for 15 years. When he died, Esther had cried for a week. We kept his ashes because we couldn't bear to part with the memory of that unconditional love. Courtney stared at the urn. Her brain refused to process what she was seeing. She reached in and pulled it out, expecting it to be heavy with coins inside. It was light. It rattled softly like dry sand. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice rising in hysteria. "What is this?" She shook the urn. "It is a dog," the thug said, laughing. "It is a dead dog, lady. You brought us here for a dead dog." Courtney looked at me. Her face went red, then purple. The disappointment hit her like a physical blow, shattering her composure completely. She had come for millions. She had found dust. "You tricked me," she screamed. "You dirty, insane old man! You tricked me!" She raised the urn high above her head. "No," I said, my voice dropping the act for just a second. "Don't." She saw the clarity in my eyes. She saw the pleading. And because she was cruel, because she wanted to hurt me more than she wanted the money, she smiled. It was a smile of pure malice. "Oops," she said. She threw the urn onto the floor. It didn't just break, it exploded. The ceramic shattered into 100 sharp shards. The gray ash puffed up into a cloud, coating the dirty concrete floor, settling on her expensive boots. The remains of the only creature in this house who had ever loved without condition were scattered in the filth. I froze. I stopped breathing. The sound of the breaking pottery echoed in the warehouse like a gunshot. But Courtney wasn't done. She looked down at the pile of ash and bone fragments. She lifted her foot, the heel of her boot sharp and menacing. "This is what you are worth," she spat. She stomped on the ashes. She ground her heel into the remains, twisting it back and forth, mixing the sacred dust with the oil and the dirt of the warehouse floor. She desecrated the memory not just of the dog, but of the love Esther and I had shared for him. "Nothing," she screamed, stomping again and again. "You are nothing. Your life is nothing. You have nothing." The thugs watched her, uncomfortable with the display. Even they had lines they didn't cross. "Let us go, lady," one of them said. "There is no gold here. He is just a crazy hoarder." Courtney stopped panting. She looked at the mess she had made. She looked at me, expecting to see me crying, expecting to see me broken. I wasn't crying. I sat on the edge of the cot, my hands resting on my knees. I didn't rock. I didn't mumble. I stared at her. I looked at the gray dust on her black boots. I looked at the shards of white ceramic. Something inside me clicked. It was the sound of a door locking shut. Until this moment, she was my son's wife. She was a greedy woman, yes, but she was family. I had held back. I had planned to teach them a lesson, to leave them poor but alive. But watching her grind Buster's ashes into the dirt, watching the pleasure she took in destroying the one thing I had tried to protect, I realized she wasn't family. She wasn't human. She was a disease. And you don't teach a disease a lesson. You eradicate it. I memorized her face. I memorized the way her lip curled. I memorized the exact shade of the dust on her shoe. I looked up at the ceiling toward the rusted fuse box where the tiny lens of the camera was hidden. I knew the red light wasn't visible, but I knew it was recording. It had seen everything. It had seen the assault. It had seen the destruction of property. And it had seen the cruelty that no court could ignore. Courtney adjusted her coat. She kicked a piece of the urn toward me. "Rot here, Isaiah," she said. "Rot here with your dead dog. Jordan will find another way to get the money. And when he does, we will burn this place to the ground with you inside it." She turned and walked out. The thugs followed her, eager to get away from the crazy woman and the silent old man. The heavy door slammed shut. I sat in the silence. The dust settled. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the spot on the floor. I knelt down in the dirt, not caring about my pants. I began to pick up the larger pieces of the urn. I couldn't save the ash. It was gone, mixed with the grime of the bottoms. I held a piece of white ceramic in my hand. It was sharp enough to cut skin. I placed it in my pocket. I walked to the safe and opened it. I took out the phone. I watched the replay. The video was high definition. The audio was crisp. Her scream of rage, her admission that Jordan owed $2 million, her threat to burn the building down. It was all there. I saved the file. Then I made a copy. Then I sent it to the cloud. I didn't feel sad anymore. I didn't feel grief. I felt cold. Cold as the grave she had just desecrated. I picked up the burner phone. I dialed Aaliyah King. "It is done." I said, my voice flat and dead. "Initiate phase 2. Send the offer." She asked me if I was sure. She asked if I wanted to wait. I looked at the spot on the floor where Buster used to be. "Send it," I said. "Offer them $5 million. Make them believe they won." I hung up. Courtney wanted gold. I was going to give her gold. I was going to give her a mountain of it. And then when she climbed to the very top, I was going to be the one to push her off. The digital trap was set on a Tuesday morning while the city was still waking up. I sat in the leather chair of Aaliyah King's office, watching the cursor on her screen blink like a heartbeat. We were about to send a ghost into the machine. Aaliyah had created a shell corporation called Vanguard Urban Development. It looked legitimate on paper, with a registered address in a glass skyscraper downtown, and a website filled with architectural renderings of a futuristic city. It was a phantom designed to hunt a ghost. "Send it," I said, my voice devoid of hesitation. Aaliyah pressed the enter key. The email flew through the fiber optic cables of the city landing with a soft ping in my son's inbox. We waited. Jordan was likely sitting in his kitchen, staring at his mounting bills and terrifying text messages from the Russians. He was a drowning man looking for a piece of driftwood. We just threw him an anchor made of lead. The offer was simple and staggering. Vanguard Urban Development was offering $5 million cash for the immediate purchase of the warehouse property and the surrounding lots in the bottoms. The email cited the new light rail expansion as the catalyst. It was a number that solved every problem Jordan had. It paid off the Russians. It covered his credit card debt. It bought the penthouse. It put him back on top. But the devil is always in the details. The purchase agreement attached to the email had a strict clause. Due to the recorded age and potential health issues of the current occupant, Vanguard required a clean title transfer signed by a legal guardian if the owner was deemed incapacitated. The timeline was tight. The offer expired in 7 days. We watched the tracking software. Jordan opened the email 4 seconds after it arrived. He opened the attachment 10 seconds later. He forwarded it to Courtney 30 seconds after that. I could almost hear the scream of joy from across the city. They didn't question why a developer wanted a ruin in a slum. They didn't question the timing. Greed blinds you to coincidences. They only saw the number with 6 zeros. They saw salvation. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the burner app connected to the bugs in my house. Did you see it? Courtney's voice came through tinny but clear. 5 million, Jordan. $5 million. We are rich, Jordan shouted. We are saved, but we need the signature, Courtney reminded him, her voice dropping to a predatory whisper. We need the guardianship. That lawyer said the hearing is on Friday. Then we make sure we win, Jordan said. We make sure the judge sees exactly what he needs to see. I leaned back in the chair. They took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. They believed they had won the lottery. They didn't know they had just cashed a ticket to prison. They thought the 5 million was real. They didn't know it was a mirage generated by the father they had thrown away. Now they had a deadline. Now they had motivation. They wouldn't kill me now. Dead men go to probate, and probate takes months. They needed me alive, but they needed me broken. They needed a judge to look at me and see a vegetable. Let them celebrate, I told Aaliyah. Let them drink their expensive champagne. It will be the last vintage they ever taste. Jordan called me an hour later. His voice was bright, manic, almost hysterical. Dad, he said, we are going to have a little party to celebrate. Celebrate what I asked, playing the confused old man. Is it my birthday? Something like that. Jordan laughed. Just be ready, Dad. We are coming to get you. Wear something nice. Or actually, don't worry about it. We have an outfit for you. I hung up. The trap was sprung. Now I just had to endure the teeth. The celebration began before they even picked me up. Through the hidden microphones, I listened to them spending money they didn't have yet. They opened a bottle of Dom Perignon that Jordan had been saving for a promotion he never got. They toasted to the stupidity of the construction company. They toasted to the luck of the real estate market. They laughed about how easy it was going to be. It is like taking candy from a baby, Courtney said, her voice slurring slightly from the alcohol, or taking land from a vegetable. They planned the evening with the precision of a military strike. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a stage play. They invited a few key people, an old family friend who was a notary, a colleague of Jordan's who had connections at the courthouse, and most importantly, Dr. Eris, the crooked doctor, who had tried to sedate me. They needed witnesses. They needed people to see Isaiah Freeman in a state of decline, so that when they stood in front of the judge on Friday, they would have a chorus of voices supporting their lies. We need him to look pathetic, Courtney instructed. We need him to look like he can't feed himself, like he is a danger to himself. I will handle it, Jordan said. I picked up a suit from the thrift store. It is hideous. It is 3 sizes too big. He will look like a clown. Perfect, she said. And no silverware. Plastic spoons only. Tell everyone he hurts himself with forks. Tell them he tries to stab people. I listened to them construct my humiliation. They were turning my life into a circus act. They were going to parade me in front of strangers and strip me of my dignity layer by layer. Most men would have run. Most men would have taken the money and the deeds and disappeared. But I wasn't running. I needed this. I needed the judge to see their cruelty. I needed the world to see what they were capable of. I sat on my cot in the warehouse and waited. I looked at the spot where they had smashed Buster's urn. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical focus. I was an actor preparing for a role. The role was the victim, but the performance was the trap. When the car arrived, I didn't fight. I let Jordan lead me out. He was smiling that wide, fake smile that showed too many teeth. Come on, Dad, he said, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. It is party time. I shuffled to the car. I let my head hang low. I let a little drool gather at the corner of my mouth. I like parties, I mumbled. Is there cake? Jordan looked at Courtney and winked. Yeah, Dad, he said. There is cake. Just for you. They drove me to their house, the house they were about to lose. The lawn was manicured. The lights were bright. Inside I could see people mingling, holding wine glasses. They were walking into a celebration of their own demise, and I was the guest of honor. They brought me into the mudroom first, away from the guests. Jordan pulled a suit out of a plastic bag. It was a bright plaid jacket from the 1970s with wide lapels and moth holes in the fabric. The pants were enormous, held up by suspenders that had lost their elasticity. Put this on, Jordan ordered. You want to look good for the guests, don't you? I put it on. The jacket swallowed me, the pants bunched around my ankles. I looked ridiculous. I looked like a senile old man playing dress-up in an attic. I feel silly, I whispered, looking in the mirror. You look great, Dad. Courtney lied, leaning against the doorframe. Just adorable. Now remember, don't talk too much. Just smile and nod. They led me into the dining room. The conversation stopped. 12 people turned to look at me. I saw pity in some eyes, amusement in others. I saw Dr. Eris in the corner nodding gravely as if my appearance confirmed his diagnosis. This is my father, Jordan, announced, his voice thick with fake sorrow. As you can see, he is having some difficulties lately. But we love him. We are doing our best. He led me to the table. They hadn't set a place for me at the main table. They had set up a small folding card table in the corner away from the adults. It was a kiddie table. Sit here, Dad, Jordan said, pushing me down into a folding chair. I sat, the suit bunched up around my neck. Courtney brought out the food. Everyone else was served steak and roasted vegetables on fine china. Courtney placed a plastic bowl in front of me. Inside was a gray, lumpy mash that smelled of old potatoes and unseasoned meat. It was baby food. And next to the bowl, she placed a bright neon pink plastic spoon. Safety first, she said loudly for the room to hear. We don't want any accidents, do we, Isaiah? The guests murmured sympathetically. Poor Jordan. Poor Courtney. Such saints taking care of such a burden. I picked up the pink spoon. My hand trembled. This was the bottom. This was the nadir of my existence. I was the king of the bottoms, wearing a clown suit, eating slop with a plastic spoon while my son laughed at me. I looked at Jordan. He was raising a glass of wine, accepting the praise of his friends. He looked triumphant. He looked like he had won. I dipped the spoon into the mash. I took a bite. It was cold and tasteless. I swallowed it. I took another bite. I forced myself to eat. I forced myself to endure every second of the humiliation. I etched the faces of the guests into my memory. I recorded every laugh, every whisper, every look of pity. I wasn't eating food. I was eating their future. With every swallow, I grew stronger. With every bite, I fueled the fire that would burn their world down. I played the fool. I smeared the food on my chin. I let the spoon clatter to the floor. Oh, dear, Courtney sighed, rushing over with a napkin. He is having a bad day. I am so sorry, everyone. She wiped my face, aggressively pushing my head back. Don't worry, Isaiah, she whispered in my ear so only I could hear. Soon you will be in a nice padded room and we will be spending your millions. I looked at her. I let my eyes go vacant. I like the pink spoon, I said softly. She patted my head like I was a dog. Enjoy it, she said. It is the only thing you have left. I sat there in my clown suit and watched them celebrate. They drank to the deal. They drank to the future. They had no idea that the man at the kiddie table owned the mortgage on their house, the debt on their car, and in 3 days would own the very air they breathed. Eat up, Jordan, I thought, as I watched him laugh. Choke on it, because the bill is coming due, and it is going to be expensive. The courtroom air was stale and recycled, smelling of floor wax and the nervous sweat of 100 defendants who had sat in this chair before me. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands folded in my lap, wearing the ridiculous plaid suit Jordan had forced me into. The fabric was itchy and smelled of mothballs, a sensory reminder of the humiliation I was enduring. Jordan had told the bailiff it was my favorite suit, that I refused to wear anything else. It was a lie designed to paint me as a caricature of a senile old man. Jordan stood at the podium. He looked the part of the grieving son perfectly. He wore a navy blue suit that was tailored to perfection. His hair was trimmed and his face was a mask of practiced sorrow. He didn't look at me. He looked at Judge Patterson, a stern woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many broken families. Your Honor, Jordan began, his voice trembling with just the right amount of emotion. This is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. My father, Isaiah Freeman, was a great man once, but the man you see before you is gone. He wanders the streets at night screaming at people who aren't there. He forgets his own name. Last week he attacked a neighbor because he thought she was stealing his mail. It was a lie. I had never attacked anyone. I had never forgotten who I was. But Jordan wove the narrative with the skill of a storyteller. He wiped a fake tear from his eye. We just want him safe, Jordan continued. We found a wonderful facility where he can get the care he needs, but he refuses to go. He is a danger to himself and others. We need guardianship to protect him. Then Dr. Eris took the stand. He walked with a confident stride, carrying a thick medical file that I knew was full of forged documents. He sat down and adjusted his glasses. In my professional opinion, Dr. Eris stated, his voice smooth and clinical. Mr. Freeman suffers from advanced vascular dementia with paranoid delusions. His cognitive decline is rapid and severe. He is incapable of managing his own affairs or making rational decisions. I recommend immediate custodial care in a secure environment. The judge listened intently, taking notes. She looked over her glasses at me. She saw the clown suit. She saw the vacant stare I was maintaining. She saw exactly what they wanted her to see. A tragedy. A husk of a man. Jordan returned to his seat next to Courtney. She squeezed his hand, looking up at him with a supportive smile. They exchanged a look. It was a look of victory. They thought they had pulled it off. They thought the gavel was about to fall in their favor, handing them the keys to my kingdom. The silence in the courtroom was heavy thick with the impending injustice. Judge Patterson opened her mouth to speak, to issue the ruling that would end my freedom. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open with a resounding thud. The sound broke the spell. Everyone turned. Aaliyah King walked in. She didn't just enter, she arrived. She wore a white suit that seemed to catch every photon of light in the room, making her glow against the drab wood paneling. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, a rhythmic staccato that sounded like a war drum. She carried a slim silver briefcase in one hand, and she marched down the center aisle with the confidence of a woman who owns the building. The bailiff started to stand up but stopped, frozen by her glare. Even the judge paused, her gavel hovering in midair. "Who are you?" Judge Patterson asked, her voice sharp with annoyance. "This is a closed hearing. I am Aaliyah King." Aaliyah announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "And I am the legal counsel for Mr. Isaiah Freeman." Jordan jumped up from his seat, his face flushing red. "Objection," he shouted. "That is impossible. My father doesn't have a lawyer. He doesn't even know what a lawyer is. He is broke and senile. Who is paying you?" Aaliyah ignored him completely. She walked straight to the defendant's table. She placed her briefcase on the wood and put a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a patronizing pat, it was a firm grip of solidarity. "He knows exactly what a lawyer is, mister," Freeman, Aaliyah said coldly, looking at Jordan. "And he knows exactly what you are doing." She turned to the bench. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I have evidence that directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims. We have evidence of conspiracy, fraud, medical malpractice, and elder abuse. I move to submit digital evidence for immediate review before any ruling is made." Jordan laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that echoed in the high ceilings. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "This is a stunt. He has no evidence. He lives in a warehouse full of garbage." Aaliyah didn't smile. She didn't argue. She simply pulled a small black flash drive from her pocket. "The evidence is not garbage," she said. "It is the truth, and the truth does not require your permission to be heard." She walked to the court clerk and handed over the drive. Judge Patterson looked at Jordan, then at Aaliyah, then at me. Curiosity warred with procedure in her eyes. "Play it," the judge ordered. The large projection screen on the side wall flickered to life. The lights in the courtroom dimmed automatically, casting Jordan and Courtney in shadow. The video began. The image was crystal clear, high-definition footage taken from a high angle. It showed the interior of the warehouse. It showed Courtney walking in wearing her expensive trench coat, flanked by her hired thugs. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. They saw her order the men to tear my home apart. They saw them smash my shelves and rip my blankets. But the gasp that went through the room happened when they found the metal box. Courtney's voice rang out clear and hateful through the court speakers. "Where is the money?" she screamed on the screen. Then she opened the urn. The audience watched as she realized it was just ashes. They saw the rage distort her beautiful face. "Oops, the video," Courtney said with a smile that made the stenographer cover her mouth in shock. She threw the urn. The sound of the ceramic shattering was amplified in the quiet courtroom. But it was what happened next that sealed their fate. The video showed a close-up of Courtney's boot grinding into the pile of ash and bone. The sound of the grit crunching under her heel was nauseating. "This is what you are worth," she spat on the screen. "Nothing. You are nothing." Judge Patterson stood up. Her face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of her bench. She looked from the screen to the woman sitting in the front row. Courtney was trembling, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. The video cut to a new scene. It was night. Jordan and Courtney were in their kitchen drinking wine. "We have to make him look crazy," Jordan's voice said clear as a bell. "We switch his meds. We get Dr. Aris to sign the papers. We lock him up and then we sell the land before the Russians kill us." The recording ended. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The only sound was the hum of the projector cooling down. Judge Patterson slammed her gavel down. The sound was like a thunderclap. It made Jordan jump. It made Dr. Aris flinch. "Enough," the judge roared. She pointed a finger at Jordan and Courtney. "Get out of my courtroom," she ordered, her voice shaking with fury. "The petition for guardianship is denied with extreme prejudice. I am referring this matter to the district attorney immediately. And you, doctor, I will be contacting the medical board personally." Jordan turned the color of ash. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. He couldn't understand how the senile old man in the clown suit had just orchestrated his destruction. Courtney grabbed her purse and ran her heels clacking on the floor, a chaotic retreat. Jordan followed her, stumbling, looking back at me one last time. They were terrified. They knew they had lost the guardianship. They knew they were in legal trouble. But they didn't know the worst part. They still thought they owned the land. They still thought they had a home to go back to. They didn't know that the man they had just tried to bury was the man who now owned their debts. I watched them run. I didn't smile. The clown suit felt heavy, but my soul felt light. The trap had snapped shut on their leg. Now it was time to tighten the wire. I looked at Aaliyah. She nodded once. "Phase 3, I whispered. "Burn it down." Desperation smells like cheap cologne trying to cover the scent of fear. Most men would have run after the judge, threw their case out of court. Most men would have taken their loss and fled the city while they still had a few dollars in their pocket. But Jordan was not most men. He was a gambler who had lost his shirt and was now betting his skin. He didn't go home to pack. He went to a printer. He went to an event planner. He decided to play the only card he had left, even though it was a joker. He organized a groundbreaking ceremony. It was a move born of pure panic. Jordan knew he couldn't sell the warehouse in the Bottoms anymore. The judge had blocked the guardianship and the mysterious Vanguard urban development had gone silent. But he still had the deed to my old house, or at least he thought he did. He knew the title was clouded by his forgery, and he knew I was coming for him, but he figured he had a window, a tiny sliver of time before the legal hammer came down. His plan was simple and stupid. He created a fake development project called the Freeman Estates. He promised luxury condos on the site of the home where he grew up. He invited investors, local politicians, and anyone with a checkbook. He wasn't planning to build anything. He just needed the deposit money. He needed 10% down from a dozen suckers so he could take the cash and disappear to a country that didn't have an extradition treaty. I watched it all unfold from the back of Aaliyah King's town car. We were parked down the street, shielded by the tint and the distance. The old house was gone. He had bulldozed it 2 days ago, leaving nothing but a scar of red dirt and memories. It hurt to see it. That was the porch where I smoked my pipe. That was the window where Esther watched the birds. Now it was just a hole in the ground covered by a white event tent and balloons that bobbed in the wind like mocking heads. Jordan had hired a catering crew on credit. He had rented a stage and a sound system. He was selling a dream that didn't exist to people who had too much money and not enough sense. I saw him walking among the crowd, shaking hands. He was vibrating with nervous energy. He laughed too loud. He talked too fast. He was a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to be pulled. He was telling them about the legacy of the land. He was telling them how his parents had blessed this project. He was using my name and Esther's memory to grift strangers out of their retirement funds. It was the final insult. He had tried to kill me. He had tried to lock me up. And now he was selling my ghost to the highest bidder. I checked my watch. It was time. Aaliyah looked at me from across the seat. She was holding a thick file of documents. "Are you ready, Mr. Freeman?" she asked. I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt. I wasn't wearing the flannel anymore. I wasn't wearing the clown suit from the thrift store. "I am ready," I said. "Let us go introduce ourselves." The scene under the white tent was a masterpiece of illusion. Courtney was working the room with the skill of a seasoned con artist. She was wearing a silk dress that shimmered in the afternoon sun and a diamond necklace that caught every ray of light. I knew for a fact the necklace was rented. I knew the dress was going to be returned tomorrow with a stain on the hem. She smiled at the investors, touching their arms, laughing at their unfunny jokes. She played the part of the devoted wife and the visionary developer perfectly. She pointed to the architectural renderings on the easels showing glass towers and rooftop pools. She spoke about community and growth. But I saw her eyes. They were darting toward the parking lot every 30 seconds. She was looking for the police. She was looking for the Russians. She was terrified. Jordan stood on the small stage holding a gold-plated shovel. It was a prop, a toy for a man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life. He tapped the microphone. Feedback squealed through the speakers, making the crowd wince. "Welcome, everyone!" Jordan shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for coming to the beginning of a new era. The Freeman Estates will be more than just a building. It will be a monument to family." He wiped sweat from his forehead. It was a cool day, but he was perspiring like he was in a sauna. His eyes were wide and manic. "My parents lived on this land for 40 years, he continued, lying through his teeth. They dreamed of seeing this neighborhood transform. My mother passed away recently, and my father is unable to be here today due to his health. But I know he is looking down on us, smiling." He wasn't looking down. I was looking straight at him. "We are opening the floor for initial deposits," Jordan said, rushing to the point. "The first 10 partners to write a check today will receive a 20% discount on the penthouse units. We have the card readers ready right over there by the champagne." The investors murmured with interest. Greed is contagious. They reached for their checkbooks. They reached for their wallets. Jordan watched them, his hands trembling on the handle of the shovel. He was so close. He could almost feel the money. He could almost see the plane ticket in his pocket. Courtney moved among them, encouraging them, pushing them. "It is a limited-time offer," she cooed. "You don't want to miss out. Jordan has put his heart and soul into this." She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. She took a sip of champagne to calm her nerves, but the glass shook in her hand, spilling a little on her rented dress. She cursed under her breath, wiping it away quickly. The mask was slipping. The fear was eating them alive from the inside out. They thought they were the hunters. They thought they were the sharks in the tank. They didn't hear the engines approaching. They didn't feel the ground rumble. We didn't come quietly. We came with the force of a thunderclap. The convoy turned the corner. 3 black Rolls-Royce Phantoms moving in perfect formation. They were sleek, dark, and menacing. They didn't look like cars. They looked like weapons. I had rented them for the day using a fraction of the money I had borrowed against the deeds. It was theater, but it was necessary theater. I needed to show these people what real power looked like. The lead car swerved, blocking the exit to the parking lot. The second car blocked the street. The third car, the one I was in, drove right up onto the curb, stopping inches from the white tent. The crowd gasped. The investors stepped back, clutching their checkbooks. Jordan froze on the stage, the gold shovel slipping from his sweaty grip. Courtney dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the pavement, a sound that echoed the breaking of their dreams. The driver of my car got out. He was a mountain of a man wearing a black suit and an earpiece. He walked around to the back door and opened it. I stepped out. The silence was absolute. I wasn't the old man in the dirty trench coat. I wasn't the senile fool in the plaid suit. I was wearing a charcoal gray bespoke suit cut from Italian wool. My shirt was crisp white starch. My shoes were polished to a mirror shine. I wore a gold watch on my wrist and sunglasses that hid my eyes. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my head high. I walked toward the tent. The crowd parted for me, instinctively sensing the authority radiating from my stride. I didn't look at the investors. I didn't look at Courtney, who was staring at me with her mouth open, her face the color of chalk. I looked at Jordan. He stood on the stage, paralyzed. He looked at me, and he didn't recognize me at first. He saw a wealthy stranger. He saw a threat. Then I took off my sunglasses. His knees buckled. He grabbed the microphone stand to keep from falling. "Dad," he whispered, his voice amplified by the speakers. I didn't stop. I walked up the stairs to the stage. My footsteps were heavy and deliberate. I walked right up to him. I smelled his fear. It smelled like sweat and cheap champagne. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He didn't fight me. He couldn't move. I turned to the crowd. I looked at the investors who were holding their pens. I looked at the city officials who had come for the free food. "Put your checkbooks away," I said, my voice booming across the empty lot. "There will be no deposits today. There will be no condos. There will be no Freeman Estates." I looked at Jordan. He was trembling, shaking so hard his teeth chattered. This man is trying to sell you land he does not own, I announced. He is trying to sell you a dream he stole. Courtney tried to run. She turned toward the parking lot, her heels clicking on the pavement, but the first Rolls-Royce blocked her path. 2 men in suits stepped out, crossing their arms. She was trapped. I turned back to my son. You wanted a legacy, Jordan, I said, so only he and the front row could hear. You wanted to be a big man. You wanted to bury your father in the trash so you could climb the ladder. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was the deed to the property we were standing on. The real deed. You forgot one thing, son, I said. You forgot that before you can build a tower, you have to own the ground. And you don't own anything. Not this land, not that car, not even the suit on your back. I dropped the deed at his feet. I own it all. Jordan looked down at the paper. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a child who realizes the game is over and the punishment is about to begin. The sirens started then, a low wail in the distance getting closer every second. I looked at the crowd. The show is over, I said. Go home. I turned my back on my son. I didn't need to see him fall. I had already dug the grave. Now I was just going to let gravity do the rest. The silence that descended upon the construction site was heavier than the humid air. I walked toward the stage, and the sound of my shoes on the pavement was the only thing audible in the entire city block. A hired security guard, a young man who didn't know he was protecting a fraud, stepped forward to intercept me. He put a hand on his belt, trying to look intimidating, but he was a paper tiger standing in the path of a tank. Before he could open his mouth, one of the men from my detail stepped in. He didn't use violence, he just placed a hand on the guard chest and whispered a few words. The guard looked at me, then at the Rolls-Royce, then at the terrified look on Jordan's face. He stepped aside. He knew when he was outclassed. I climbed the wooden stairs to the temporary stage. Every step was a memory. The first step was for the day Jordan was born, when I promised to protect him. The second step was for the day he graduated college, when I thought he would be a better man than me. The third step was for the rainy afternoon he threw me into the mud like garbage. I reached the top of the platform. Jordan was still frozen, his knuckles white on the microphone stand. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He smelled of fear and expensive cologne that couldn't mask the rot inside him. I didn't ask for the microphone. I reached out and took it. Jordan let go, his fingers slipping off the metal as if it were red hot. He stumbled back, bumping into the podium, the gold-plated shovel falling with a clatter that rang out like a bell tolling for a funeral. I looked out at the sea of faces, the investors who were about to lose their money, the politicians who were looking for a photo opportunity, the neighbors who remembered me as the quiet man who fixed their fences. They were looking at a ghost who had returned from the grave wearing a bespoke suit. I adjusted the microphone. I looked directly into the camera of the local news crew that Jordan had so arrogantly invited. "My name is Isaiah Freeman," I said, my voice booming across the lot without a tremor. "And I am the only man standing on this stage who owns the ground beneath his feet." The crowd murmured. A ripple of confusion went through the investors. Jordan tried to speak, but his voice was a squeak. "Dad, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. We can talk." I turned to him. My eyes were dry. My heart was a stone. "We are done talking, son," I said into the mic so everyone could hear. "You did all the talking when you forged my signature. You did all the talking when you buried your mother and kicked me out before her body was cold. Now it is my turn to speak." I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a document. It was the original deed to the property kept safe in the warehouse vault for 40 years. I unfolded it. The paper was yellowed with age, but the seal was unmistakable. "This land belongs to me," I announced. "It has belonged to me since 1982. It has never been sold. It has never been transferred. And it certainly does not belong to the Freeman estates." Jordan found a scrap of courage born of pure panic. "He is lying," Jordan shouted to the crowd, his voice cracking. "He is senile. He signed the transfer papers last week. I have the documents. He is confused. He doesn't know what he is doing." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I was hoping you would say that," I said. I signaled to the side of the stage. Aaliyah King walked up the stairs. She was holding a large display board covered in a black cloth. She set it on an easel next to the podium. She ripped the cloth away. Underneath were 2 enlarged images. One was a copy of the transfer document Jordan had forced me to sign in the warehouse. The other was a forensic analysis report. "This is the document my son claims I signed," I said, pointing to the shaky scrawl on the left. "It looks like the signature of a weak, dying man, doesn't it? A man who couldn't hold a pen. A man who was losing his mind." I looked at the investors. "My son thought he was smart," I continued. "He brought a witness. He brought a lawyer. He thought he had forced me to sign away my life. But he forgot one thing about his father. He forgot that I taught him how to throw a baseball. He forgot that I taught him how to use a hammer." I held up my right hand. "I am right-handed," I said. "I have been right-handed for 68 years. Every check I ever wrote, every contract I ever signed, I signed with this hand." I pointed to the display board. But that signature, the one on the transfer document, was written with my left hand. The crowd gasped. The investors leaned forward, squinting at the board. Aaliyah stepped to the microphone. "I have here a sworn affidavit from a forensic handwriting analyst," Aaliyah stated, her voice sharp and professional. "It confirms that the signature on the transfer deed was written by a person using their non-dominant hand under duress. It also confirms that the signature does not match any of Mr. Freeman official documents from the past 40 years. This transfer is not just void, it is evidence of fraud." Jordan shook his head violently. "No," he screamed. "That is a trick. He is lying." I turned to him. "It is not a trick, Jordan," I said. "It is a trap, and you walked right into it. You were so busy looking at the money you didn't look at the man holding the pen. You saw a victim. You didn't see your father." I looked back at the crowd. "This project is a lie," I declared. "There is no development. There is no land. The only thing my son is building here is a prison cell for himself." The investors started to move. They put their checkbooks away. They picked up their phones, calling their lawyers, calling their banks. The dream of the luxury condos evaporated in the afternoon sun, leaving only the ugly truth of a son who tried to steal from his father. But I wasn't done. The land was just the beginning. I had taken his future. Now I was going to take his present. "I have one more announcement," I said. The crowd quieted down. They sensed blood in the water. "My son owes a lot of money," I said. "He owes banks, he owes credit card companies, and he owes $2 million to private investors who are not known for their patience." Jordan looked at me with horror. He knew I knew, but he didn't know the rest. "He thought he could sell this land to pay them back," I continued. "He thought he could use my death to save his life. But since this land is not his to sell, he has a problem. He is insolvent." I reached into my pocket again. This time I pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a red rubber band. "So I decided to help him," I said. Jordan blinked, confused. "Help me," he whispered. "I bought his debt," I announced. The words hung in the air. "I formed a company called Freeman Holdings," I explained. "And as of this morning, Freeman Holdings has purchased the promissory notes for every single debt Jordan Freeman has outstanding. I bought the note from the private investors. I bought the liens on his car. I bought the mortgage on the house he lives in." I looked at Jordan. "You don't owe the Russians anymore, son," I said. "You owe me." Jordan's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the stage, not in a faint, but in a sheer physical failure of his body to support the weight of his reality. He looked up at me from the floor, his eyes wide and wet. "You own me," he whispered. "I own everything," I corrected him. "I own the shirt on your back. I own the watch on your wrist. I own the air you are breathing right now. You have 30 days to pay me $2 million plus interest. And unlike the Russians, I don't want your fingers. I want justice." The crowd erupted. The investors who had been invited, the creditors who had been sniffing around, they all started shouting. They realized that Jordan wasn't just a fraud, he was a pauper. He was a man who had been hollowed out by his own father. Courtney, who had been blocked by my security team, screamed from the sidelines. "You can't do this," she yelled. "We have rights. We are family." I looked down at Jordan. "Family?" I asked him. "You threw your family in the trash, Jordan. You tried to bury your family in a warehouse. You don't have a family, you have a creditor. And I am collecting today." I signaled to the police officers who were waiting at the edge of the lot. They had been watching. They had been listening, and now they had everything they needed. "Officers," I said into the microphone, "I believe this man is trespassing on my property, and I believe he has attempted to sell land that does not belong to him, which is a felony fraud. Please remove him." Jordan tried to crawl away. He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't work. He looked at the crowd, searching for a friendly face, but there were none. There was only judgment. I watched as the officers walked up the stairs. I watched as they pulled my son to his feet. I watched as they cuffed his hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel happiness. I felt a heavy, cold satisfaction. It was the feeling of a job finished. It was the feeling of a balance sheet finally zeroed out. I lowered the microphone. The show was over. The lesson had been taught. "Take him away," I said to the officers. And as they dragged him off the stage, kicking and crying, I turned my back on him and looked out at the city I had helped build. I was Isaiah Freeman. I was the king of the bottoms, and nobody was ever going to forget it again. The sirens cut through the afternoon air like a knife slicing through the heavy tension of the construction site. It was not the local patrol car coming to issue a noise complaint. It was a fleet of unmarked sedans followed by a tactical van. The Economic Crimes Unit had arrived. They moved with the precision of a pack of wolves that had already cornered their prey. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They simply walked up the stairs of the stage, forming a perimeter around my son, who was still on his knees weeping into the wood planks. A detective in a windbreaker stepped forward. He pulled a folded warrant from his pocket. He didn't look at me or Aaliyah. He looked straight at Jordan. "Jordan Freeman," he said, his voice flat and professional. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. We also have a separate warrant for the attempted theft of real property." Jordan looked up. His face was a mask of snot and tears. He looked at the handcuffs dangling from the detective belt. He looked at the investors who were filming him with their phones. He looked at the ruins of his life. "It wasn't me," Jordan screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I didn't do it. I was pressured. I was forced." The detective pulled Jordan up by his arm. He spun him around and slammed him against the podium, not out of brutality, but out of necessity to get the cuffs on a man who was flailing like a drowning swimmer. The metal clicked shut. That sound was the period at the end of a very long and painful sentence. Jordan twisted his head, looking frantically for a lifeline. His eyes landed on Courtney, who was standing near the edge of the stage, frozen in horror. It was her. Jordan shrieked, trying to point with his bound hands. "She made me do it. She told me to forge the signature. She told me to hire the doctor. She is the one who wanted the money. I just wanted to make her happy. She is the mastermind. Arrest her too." He was throwing his wife to the wolves to save his own skin. It was pathetic. It was cowardly. And it was exactly what I expected from a man who would throw his own father into the mud. The detective ignored him. He read him his rights in a monotone voice while Jordan continued to sob and scream accusations at his wife. The crowd watched in fascinated horror. This wasn't just a failed business deal. It was the public dissection of a family. I stood there adjusting my cuffs, watching my son be dragged toward the stairs. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the ghost of the love I used to have for him. But then I remembered the warehouse. I remembered the cold. I remembered the feeling of being discarded. The pain vanished. Courtney watched her husband being hauled away like a sack of garbage. I saw the gears turning in her head. She saw the ship sinking and she knew she had to jump. She looked at the police. She looked at the investors. And then she looked at me. She saw the suit. She saw the Rolls Royce. She saw the power. And in that moment she decided that dignity was a luxury she could not afford. She ran. She didn't run away from the stage. She ran toward me. It was when she slapped me in the warehouse. It was when she grabbed my arm to hold me down while her thugs tore my life apart. She was sobbing loudly now, a theatrical display of grief meant to sway the crowd, meant to make me look like a cruel patriarch if I kicked her away. She was gambling on my heart. She was gambling that the old Isaiah, the soft Isaiah, was still in there somewhere buried under the suit. She thought she could manipulate the grandfather who wanted a family. But that grandfather was gone. He had died the moment she kicked the photograph of my wife. I didn't move my legs. I didn't try to shake her off. I just stood there, tall and immovable like a statue cast in iron. I let her cry. I let her beg. I let the cameras zoom in on her desperation. I wanted the world to see her. I wanted them to see the woman who had stomped on ashes begging for mercy from the man she tried to destroy. She thought she was hugging a savior. She was hugging a tombstone. She pulled back slightly, looking up at my face, searching for a crack in the armor. She saw none. She saw only her own reflection in my dark sunglasses. "Please, Isaiah," she whispered, dropping the act for a split second, her voice hissing with greed. I know where the rest of the money is. We can share it. Just tell them I helped you." It was the final nail. Even now, with her husband in cuffs and her life in ruins, she was trying to cut a deal. She was a parasite looking for a new host. I reached up and slowly removed my sunglasses. I folded them and placed them in my pocket. I looked down at her. I looked into her eyes. I let the silence stretch until the only sound was the wind snapping the canvas of the tent. "Get up," I said softly. She blinked, thinking I was offering forgiveness. She started to stand, a smile of relief forming on her lips. I didn't offer her a hand. I took a step back, breaking her hold on me. She stumbled, almost falling again. "Do you remember the box?" I asked, my voice carrying over the microphone I was still holding. She froze. The smile vanished. "The metal box in the warehouse," I continued, my voice hard as granite. "The one you thought was full of gold. The one that held the only thing in this world I had left to love." Courtney went pale. She looked at the cameras, then back at me. "I remember you opening it," I said. "I remember you throwing it on the floor. I remember the sound it made. And I remember your boot grinding the ashes of my dog into the dirt." I pointed a finger at her. "You said I was worth nothing," I said. "You said I was dirt." I leaned closer to her, invading her space, my shadow falling over her. "That dog had more loyalty in one hair than you have in your entire body. That dust you stepped on was sacred to me. It was the last piece of the life I built with my wife, and you treated it like trash because it wasn't a gold bar." Courtney tried to speak, but no words came out. She was shaking. "You want mercy?" I asked. "You want me to save you because we are family?" I looked out at the crowd. "This woman is not my family," I declared. "This woman is a vandal. She is a thief, and she is a stranger to me." I looked back down at her. "You are not worth the dust you stepped on," I said. "You are not worth the air in this tent." I snapped my fingers. Two of my security guards stepped forward. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask permission. They grabbed Courtney by the arms. They lifted her off the ground, her feet dangling, her expensive heels scraping the stage. "Get your hands off me," she screamed, kicking and thrashing. "I am a freeman. I own this land. You own nothing," I said, turning my back on her. "Throw her out." The guards dragged her to the edge of the stage. They didn't walk her down the stairs. They tossed her. Not violently enough to break bones, but firmly enough to make a point. She landed in the dirt outside the police barricade right in front of the press pool. The cameras flashed, blinding her. The reporters shouted questions. She covered her face, cowering in the mud, the same mud her husband had thrown me into weeks ago. It was poetic. It was symmetry. I watched her for a moment, a broken figure in a stained dress. Then I looked at the empty spot where my son had stood. The stage was empty now. Just me and the microphone. I looked at Aaliyah. She was smiling a fierce, proud smile. "It is done," she mouthed. I nodded. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked at the hole in the ground where my house used to be. The house was gone. The family was gone. But the land remained. And I remained. I took the deed out of my pocket and held it up. "This is just the beginning," I whispered to myself. I walked down the stairs to my waiting car. I didn't look back at the chaos I had unleashed. I had burned the weeds from my garden. Now it was time to plant something new. Time has a way of balancing the scales that no judge or jury can replicate. A year is a long time when you are living it in a cage. I received a letter from the state penitentiary yesterday. It wasn't a letter of apology. It was a notification of a medical incident involving inmate number 49210, Jordan Freeman. I didn't visit him. I didn't send a lawyer. I just read the report. My son, the man who was so worried about muddying his Italian shoes, was now mopping floors in cell block D. He wasn't the shark he thought he was. In prison, he was the bait. The report detailed an altercation in the showers. Jordan had tried to negotiate with a gang member using money he didn't have. The result was a broken jaw and 3 missing front teeth. I closed my eyes and tried to picture him. I tried to see the arrogant boy who stood on the stage and lied to the world. But I couldn't see him. I could only see a frightened man huddled in a concrete corner, realizing that his father wasn't coming to bail him out. He had traded his freedom for a dream of wealth, and now he was paying the rent with his own blood. Across the city, in a fluorescent-lit public restroom, another tragedy was playing out in slow motion. Courtney was on her knees. She wasn't begging for forgiveness anymore. She was scrubbing the grout between the tiles of a urinal in the bus station. My investigators kept tabs on her, not because I cared, but because I needed to be sure she never came near my assets again. After the arrest, her life collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Her friends abandoned her. Her parents refused to take her in, ashamed of the public scandal. She had no skills, no references, and a criminal record for fraud. The only job she could get was the one she used to look down on with such disdain. She lived in a basement apartment that flooded when it rained, a place far worse than the warehouse she had mocked. Her hands, once manicured and adorned with rented diamonds, were now chapped and red from harsh chemicals. She wore a blue uniform that was too big for her gaunt frame. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the face of the woman who stomped on my dog's ashes. And every time she scrubbed a toilet, she remembered the life she threw away because she wasn't patient enough to wait for an inheritance. They were living the hell they had designed for me. They were cold. They were hungry. They were forgotten. It wasn't cruelty on my part to leave them there. It was the natural order of consequences. They had sown the wind, and now they were reaping the whirlwind. The sun was shining on the corner of 4th and Elm, the spot where my old house used to stand. The scar in the earth was gone. The memories of betrayal were buried under tons of concrete and steel. In its place stood a modern glass and brick building that gleamed in the morning light. It wasn't a condo tower. It wasn't a monument to greed. Above the wide double doors, a silver plaque read, "The Esther Freeman Center." Hundreds of people had gathered for the opening. This time, they weren't greedy investors looking for a quick profit. They were the people of the neighborhood. They were elderly men and women who had been forgotten by the system. They were young lawyers looking to make a difference. They were the community I had returned to. I stood at the podium. I wasn't wearing the clown suit. I was wearing the same charcoal suit I wore the day I took my life back. Aaliyah King stood beside me holding a pair of large ceremonial scissors. She looked proud. She looked like the daughter I should have had. "This building is not for me," I said into the microphone, my voice strong and clear. "This building is for everyone who has ever been told they are expired. It is for everyone who has been told they are a burden." The Esther Freeman Center was a fortress. It offered free legal counsel to seniors facing financial abuse. It offered vocational training for young people from the bottoms, teaching them trades so they wouldn't have to turn to crime. It had a clinic, a library, and a garden filled with the flowers Esther loved. It was built on the land my son tried to steal, paid for with the fortune he tried to kill me for. It was the ultimate alchemy, turning his poison into medicine for the city. I looked at the crowd. I saw Dante, the young man who had tried to rob me on my first night back. He was wearing a security uniform, working for the center, guarding the people he used to prey upon. I had given him a job, a purpose, and a paycheck. He nodded at me, a silent gesture of respect between men who understand the language of the streets. I picked up the scissors. The sun glinted off the blades. "My wife Esther believed in home," I said, my voice catching slightly. "She believed that a home wasn't just walls. It was safety. It was love. When that safety is threatened, we have a duty to fight back." I cut the ribbon. The red silk fell to the ground. The crowd cheered. It wasn't the polite applause of the country club. It was the raucous, joyful noise of the bottoms celebrating its own survival. I walked through the doors of the center. I walked past the legal clinic where lawyers were already taking cases. I walked past the classrooms where computers were humming. I walked to the central atrium where a large portrait of Esther hung. She was smiling, watching over us. I touched the frame. "We did it, Essie," I whispered. "We didn't just survive. We won. And we didn't have to sell our souls to do it." The elevator ride to the top floor of the new Freeman Holdings Tower was smooth and silent. It was a long way up from the damp floor of the warehouse. The doors opened directly into my office, a space of glass and steel that overlooked the entire district. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below me, the bottoms was changing. The light rail station was under construction. New businesses were opening, the streets were cleaner, the fear was receding, replaced by a cautious optimism. And I owned it all, not to squeeze it dry, but to water it. Aaliyah walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me and stood beside me, looking out at the city we had reshaped. "The district attorney called," she said quietly. "Jordan's appeal was denied. He will serve the full 10 years. And Courtney was evicted this morning. She is moving into a shelter downtown." I took a sip of the coffee. It was hot and bitter, just the way I liked it. I nodded. I didn't feel a spike of joy. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I just felt the balance of the universe settling into place. "Do you ever miss them?" Aaliyah asked, looking at me sideways. Do you ever miss the idea of them? I thought about the question. I thought about the Sunday dinners that were full of lies. I thought about the hugs that were just assessments of my wallet. No, I said, I miss the people I thought they were. But those people never existed. They were ghosts, Aaliyah. They were masks worn by strangers who wanted what was in my pocket. I turned away from the window and looked at her. You know, I continued. People say blood is thicker than water. They use that to justify abuse. They use it to trap you in toxic cycles. But I learned something in that warehouse. What is that? Aaliyah asked. I learned that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, I said. The family you choose, the people who stand by you when you are in the mud, that is the only family that matters. I walked back to my desk. On it sat a small framed photo of a golden retriever named Buster. Next to it was a photo of Esther, and next to that was a new photo. It was a picture of me and Aaliyah standing in front of the center on opening day. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, a smile that reached my eyes. I was 70 years old. I was alone in terms of biology, but I was surrounded by loyalty. I had a legacy that would outlive my name. I finished my coffee and set the cup down. The sun was setting, painting the sky over the city in shades of purple and gold. It was the end of the day, but for me it was just the beginning. I looked at the camera one last time, breaking the fourth wall of my own life. My name is Isaiah Freeman. I survived the betrayal of my own blood. I rebuilt my empire from the ashes of my past. And if you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Character makes family, not DNA. Protect your peace, protect your legacy, and never ever let anyone underestimate you just because you are old. The screen went black, leaving only the truth echoing in the silence. My journey taught me that the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that we must endure abuse for the sake of family. Blood is biological, but loyalty is a choice. I spent years protecting a son who saw me only as a resource, ignoring the signs of his greed until he pushed me to the brink of death. True wealth isn't the land I own or the money in the vault. It's the peace of knowing who stands beside you when the storm hits. Never apologize for cutting off toxic roots to save the rest of the tree. Your dignity is the one asset you can never afford to lose. If you believe that respect must be earned and not just inherited, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Share your own experience in the comments. Have you ever had to cut off a family member to save yourself? I read every single story.